Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 378 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renner. The show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner, spoke with Coach Boyle about force. So we go pretty deep, and this is all inspired by Hunter Eisenhower's articles on Simplifaster. We'll have a link to them in the show notes. And wanted to just talk to Coach Boyle. Hunter does a great job of kind of categorizing his force system, and wanted to talk to Coach about really how he feels, what can he implement into his system, what he feels was important. This is an article, again, that he really felt made him really think. And so he's been doing some staff meetings on it. He's reading a book on force again. So really kind of caught his attention. So we're going to talk all about it coming up in a little bit. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Kevin Carr, co-owner at MBSC, co-founder at CFSC, and Movement as Medicine. His upcoming lecture at the MBSC Spring Seminar is 5 fitness facts that could save your life. And it's really talking about the different things that we can do as personal trainers and coaches for longevity, Healthspan, really, and lifespan. And whether or not we can make an impact on things, whether that's what Peter Attia would call the 4 pillars: cardiovascular disease, cognitive health, cancer, and obviously obesity and type 2 diabetes type things, which we obviously can make a big difference on that. So we're going to go into some of the benefits of that and really how there's been a shift in general population towards that, especially with people like Attia and David Sinclair really talking a lot about longevity. I think it's kind of going down into the masses now, and I think it's making our jobs a little bit easier to kind of, from a buy-in perspective. For the Naamly, maximizing the member experience, it's Sumit Seth. He's the founder of Naamly. He's going to talk about asking for referrals. And what I really liked about what he talked about in this is it's not just about business growth. There's a huge community aspect to it as well. Obviously, the more people that you know at the gym, the more it gives you more reason to be there. And so you can really help. Referrals can help you build that community too. All right, guys, don't forget, Perform Better. The functional training summits are coming. We're 2 months away from Orlando. It's going to be Orlando, May 30th, June 1st. Chicago, the end of June, 27th to 29th. LA, August 1st to the 3rd. And Providence, August 22nd to the 24th. Now, there's going to be a pre-con on Thursdays, kind of going back to that. So it's a new look summit, really. Thursday pre-con is back. And he's cutting out Sunday. Chris has cut out Sunday. So it's 2 days. There's some really different presenters coming on because they cut out the Sundays, and they had to cut some presenters and they had to add some presenters. So it's definitely going to be a little different. They've also added a Q&A into, so there used to be like 2 practicals and 2 lectures. There's also a Q&A, so now you can network with the presenters when you want to go sit down at a table with them. We're going to get Chris Barrier on for probably the next episode, talk all about it. But guys, check it all out at PerformBetter.com. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, guys, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and MBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. MBSC.TV, you can get a free 7-day trial. And this is today's episode. We have we're talking about force. Coach Boyle's been going down that rabbit hole, and there is 2 staff meetings on it. And you can read the article. We're going to point you in the right direction on Simplifaster, and we're going to talk all about it. Also, by the way, later on, I have Kevin Carr on, and we talk a lot about some of the things that he was talking about on MBSC.TV. So anyway, Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing well. We're in a crazy nor'easter rainstorm up here. We're only getting rain, but I just sent you the video. The Plum Island where I live, the road was flooded out, so I couldn't even go to work today. High tide covered the road.
What about your house? Are you close to? Is it like kind of scary with the flooding piece?
We're close, but we've never been close enough to worry. So we're probably 3 houses away from being worried. 10 years from now, you could be 2 houses away. So it's.
Do you know what your elevation is of your house? I only say this because my dad actually knows his elevation in Florida. It's 22 feet above sea level, which is awesome in Florida because he's never had any flooding
Honestly,
problems.
we are probably, I would say, if I was going to guess, we're probably only 5 or 6 feet above the high tide mark. At least the highest tide mark, if you went.
Yeah.
So
water's pretty scary.
Most of Plum Island is that way in terms of.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. Bunch of people got flooded again today.
Jeez, it's scary.
Third time since January, probably, that people have gotten. People who get water got water.
Jeez. Definitely.
Weather report.
There we go.
Mike Sense is happy now. We can move on.
Mike, okay, so you have been talking a lot lately, to your staff. You've been posting on traincoach.com about force. Hunter Eisenhower, who's the associate head coach of sports performance at Arizona State University, wrote a couple of articles, The Force System in Training and Redefining Strength, which was the first article. High force does not equal high load. It kind of starts off with this is almost like a Mike Boyle quote. Field and court sport athletes use a different strength than power lifters. That's from Joel Smith, but you've been saying that forever. And I just thought it was really interesting, especially the force system, because now he starts to kind of put things in a box and buckets, and he basically talks about his pillars of high force, fast force, slow force, and human force. So talk to me about what, you always say, I like articles that make me think. And this one was, he wanted us to reimagine how we look at sports performance without the reliance on powerlifting, O-lifting, or bodybuilding. Now, these elements are each present, but on a smaller scale than the average program. So talk to us about what you liked about this article, how it's made you think, and how it's made you kind of go down the force rabbit hole.
Well, one, it made me think because it brought up topics that I was not comfortable with. So when you start thinking about things as simple as Newton's laws, and I said on Twitter, I took physics, I think, 40 whatever years ago, 45 years ago, 44 years ago, something like that. And I haven't taken a physics course since. So when you start to look at what he was saying, I guess the biggest thing is I agreed. I looked and thought he's right in terms of we really need to be looking probably at forces versus loads, because there are times that the load can be body weight, but the force can be high. So that's the kind of depth drop example. And we know that one of the things that we said in the staff meeting was that we were doing a pretty good job managing ground reaction forces. And I think empirically, we've come to a good place with our plyometric progressions with ground reaction force. But there is maybe a potential for overload via depth jump, depth drop. And I think even there, you've got to get into, we talked about that a little bit in the staff meeting yesterday. Okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to just simply drop and stick? Are we going to drop and rebound? Are we going to do that single leg? Are we going to do that double leg? How are we going to implement it? And this really, the good or the bad part, it only applies to our better athletes. It doesn't apply to the kids that we have right now, our adults, everybody that's at MBSC right now. This is probably at best moderately applicable. But when we start getting into our NHL guys, our Olympic level, national team level women in the summer, then we probably have to start looking at this and saying, okay, what are we going to change from a programming standpoint, and how are we going to change it? So I love articles that make me think. I love articles that make me want to explore maybe adding something. As I said, I was not a depth jump, depth drop. I still feel like I have to go back. I wrote an article about it because I don't think we even do a good job defining the terms as far as what we're really looking at. And then starting to say, okay, can we incorporate that? And we started the last couple summers. I started doing a little bit because we did have people for longer than 4 phases. And when you start playing at kind of later phase plyos, you say, okay, it probably makes sense to maybe go slightly higher than where they can jump. Because again, that's where you realize everybody deals with the forces of gravity that they encounter in the course of their normal jumping, if they jump in their sport or if they jump in training. And it goes back, we talked about it. It was really interesting because I don't know if you remember, but in the Jill Cook podcast that we talked about a bunch of times, one of the questions that Jake Turr asked her was, what do you think about depth jumps and depth drops? And her response was, I have no idea why anybody would jump down from a height higher than they can jump up. And I thought, wow, that's pretty smart. But then I thought, if we're seeking overload and eventually to be able to jump higher, maybe we do need to be coming down and dealing with braking forces that are going to be an overload. So the thing that you run into, and this is the problem, people just do stupid stuff. They just start finding, high things to stand on and jumping off, and not what I want to do is respect the physics and look at the physics. Because Ken Whittier just texted me about this 10 minutes ago as I was on my way to talk, up here to talk to you. And I said, because he was saying, Verkhoshansky recommends 30 inches. This person recommends this. And I said, throw all those numbers out. You can't use any numerical. It's the same thing we always talk about. Numerical recommendations make no sense because you have to base it on the vertical jump of the person. How high? If I have a person who's got a 20-inch vertical and I go to 30-inch depth drop, I've overloaded them by 33%. That's a really significant overload. That person may end up with patella tendonitis or patellofemoral pain or whatever it is. But if I take that person to maybe a 24-inch box and have them step off, now they're at 20%. That's probably going to be pretty reasonable for them in terms of engaging the overload principle as we apply it to physics, because now we're looking at it. We always thought of overload principle as just more weight. Now we're looking at overload as saying, okay, let's add more gravity. Let's add more acceleration due to gravity. And now you've got to look at that and figure out, okay, what's the variable, obviously, that we're manipulating is height relative to best vertical jump. And then we talked about yesterday in the staff meeting, if we look at most people having a bilateral deficit and start looking and saying, I wish I could remember who said it, but somebody messaged me or on one of the social media apps or something and said, why do you do so much double leg plyo work when you're doing so much single leg strength work? And my response, and I think I've said this to you before, was kind of because we always have. Mm-hmm. We've always done that. So now I have to look at that and think, all right, do we start with bilateral and depth drop, and then maybe phase 2 is single leg? So let's just say we start somebody, I get our guys that are 30-inch vertical jumps and we start at 33 or 36 or something like that, stepping off, double leg landing, 20% increase in force. I think, and again, I'm not enough of a physicist. I don't know necessarily if I increase the height by 20%, do I only increase the force by 20%? Because one of the things that we're looking at is mass times acceleration. I'm assuming the mass stays the same. The acceleration is going to increase, but does that increase result in the 20% jump in force that I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm not enough of a physicist to be able to really parse that stuff out. And that's
you'd have to get the force plate out, right? I mean, really, you'd have to
get the force plate out. Exactly. And that's what you would have to do is look and say, okay, what are we getting what we think we're getting? But I think the big thing is if you are conservative with this, you're going to be fine, because there are people it's not like people are blowing people's patella tendons out by doing stuff that's not conservative. I just think they're probably leading someone down an overuse path that I don't want to go to.
Yeah. But I know what you're saying. I think the high force stuff is, and when you talk about, it's going to be for the better athletes, obviously, with longer training ages. But he did talk about like human force. Great. That was his fourth one, which is really the first step. It's kind of stuff you can put in the warm up. He kind of talked about, hangs, different kind of hangs and rolls and crawling, some carrying, right? And then there's the slow force, which we've talked about that before on here too, is that's yielding isometrics. And I feel like that piece of it is good timing with the Jake Tura stuff from a tendon perspective. It's like, okay, when he talked about, creating healthier tendons, we'd want to do things slower, right? So
it all ties together nicely when you start looking. It ties in the Y ISO piece, which is good. And then I went back and listened to an Alex Natera podcast that he did with Rob Pacey and a guy named Danny Lum, and I forget the third guy's name. But Alex made a really good point, and this is the stuff that we don't get enough of, is the simplistic, like, oh, I get it. So he was talking about the difference in isometrics is your intent. So he said, if you do a split squat ISO, there's no intent to shorten. If you do an isometric mid thigh pull or a squat pull or whatever, or a squat push, you are attempting to concentrically shorten, but you're being prohibited from doing that. So you start thinking about that and saying, okay, we may have to try to figure out a way to create those situations in a way that's I won't say, like, I guess safe. I don't love the sort of maximal isometric thing, the intent to shorten thing, because I've seen bad things happen. I can remember in the old powerlifting days, I've seen people break blood vessels in their eyes, straining to get a squat that they didn't get. I've seen people trying to, max deadlifts where they don't get it, really injure themselves. So you have to start figuring out a way, okay, how do we gauge that sort of isometric contraction versus the iso hold type of contraction? And then how do we get them both incorporated? And then you look at, and I actually got to go back because I was rereading Hunter's article today for exactly, I mean, not that I knew you were going to talk to me about it, but I guess he was calling it slow force. And in slow force was where you holds. So we've got sort of the overcoming isometric that we have to think about, the intent to shorten. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the really probably true isometric where we're doing the holds. And then we've got this oscillatory stuff that isn't really, I mean, I guess it is eccentric into isometric. So you're going eccentric, isometric. But now you get into, and this is another reason why I'm thinking about 3-day programs in the summer, because there's a lot of stuff to do as you start looking at all this and thinking, how do I incorporate all this in? And of course, somebody's going to say, oh, just use Cal Dietz triphasic system. I don't think it's that simple, to be very honest. But I love when people give you the simple answer where you think, okay, you have no idea what you're talking about, but you're great at parroting what somebody else said. I do think you have to look and say, okay, we don't want to not do the things that we've been doing. There are things that we do want to add. And then, sorry, the place that I got lost a little bit when I started talking to you is when we start talking about the overcoming isometrics. They're harder to do because you need to figure out some way to safely set up, let's say in a rack, to either push or pull against the rack. And one of the things that I said the other day to somebody was that's easy to do when somebody else has to rebolt the racks into the ground. It's not so easy to do when they're your racks and you think, okay, if we're pulling against these racks or pushing against these racks, are we actually going to dislodge racks? Or if we want to pull against something, how can we get the pins in the rack so that we can get these types of contractions? And then looking and saying, okay, one of the things that Tara talked about was getting a strain gauge, which is kind of a strain gauge, kind of like a fishing scale, if you can imagine, if you think of that sort of technology. But it's a fishing scale that doesn't stretch. It only tells you how much the fish weighs. You know what I mean? Like, so you're pulling and you're able to look and think, okay, how much force are we producing? So you've got to figure out some way to quantify that overcoming isometric. That's my I guess, one of my dilemmas in this whole process.
Yeah. What about, because like we talked about, and like I said, Mike Vaughn was saying, he feels like we're doing a good job of the high force and fast force. I imagine your high force stuff is for you. A lot of this stuff is logistics and, whether or not it's safe, whether that, the deceleration training is probably the easiest one, but the depth drop, the harness overcoming ISO from a logistics point, that's kind of harder to do. And the drop catches, I saw those. I said, there's no way. I would imagine there's no way you're doing drop catches with people. What were your thoughts on
I
those?
could see, in like the drop catching, kind of the oscillatory stuff. I could see what, like, he was
Okay.
doing one with a kettlebell where he was simply just releasing his grip on the kettlebell and grabbing. I think
Okay.
there are probably some ways you could do that from a lower body perspective that would be okay. But yeah, I just think, Mike said, as he said, I think we're doing a pretty good job. I think we're accidentally doing a pretty good job. I think we need to be more intentional and look at it and say, okay, what am I really trying to get? Because the other thing that Natera was talking about, he was like, I think he said, and I have to go back. The bad part about all these things, when you listen to him when you drive, you can't take notes.
Yeah.
I think he said he just uses 10-second ISO holds, and then if people can do it, he just adds more weight. And so you start thinking, because we were playing with longer ISO holds in terms of going 30 to 45 to a minute. So I think there's some variables there too to play with where you start looking and thinking, okay, do I want to go start at 30 seconds? If we're talking about just the conventional isometric, the split squat hold as an example, is it just all right? You start with 220 kilo dumbbells, and if you can do 220s, the next week you go for 224s, and the next week you go for 228s. Yeah. That's the way that you increase that loading. But the most important thing for me is that it gives you another area to look at. The one thing, we said this is Daphne, we do unintentional deceleration training because our decel zone stays the same, but we're always lengthening out the fly. So we get someone they start in phase 1, they're running 5-yard fly-ins. They're running a 15 and they've got about 15 to decel. We then move them back to a 10-yard fly, and now they run a 20 and they've got 15 to decel. Then we move them back to 15. Now they've got 15 and they've still got 15, or they've got 25 rather, and they've still only got 15 yards to decel. So there it gets hard to almost not hit the wall. And you look and think, wow, we've unintentionally incorporated deceleration training by being space limited and by having a progression, by lengthening our sprints, but not lengthening our deceleration zone. We've effectively done something positively.
What about, I think it was in the first article, he was doing something like the depth drop, but it wasn't from a box. It was like a depth drop lunge. So it would look like only like a 6-inch box, maybe, where you're stepping off. And then he presses down too, like they stop, right? Pretty hard. So
I was doing that. I've been doing that the last 2 years with our ACL kids, because I think that's a really important thing. Because I think, again, I would say ACL, when you start looking at it in terms of force, ACLs are a force management problem. You don't have the decelerative ability. You don't have the strength, the braking force, I guess, is really what we're looking at. You lack the braking force necessary. And then when you go past a certain point, obviously you get injured. So we started doing kind of hard transitions, dropping, going forward hard into the lunge and really trying to pop ourselves back. So I think but we started with that idea of just kind of dropping into the lunge. That's almost, in some ways, that's kind of the first plyo we do with our ACL people, is just boom, stop yourself, come back, boom, stop yourself. Very, very low amplitude there. But that's what I'm looking at when you start talking about single leg depth jump. You start thinking, okay, I'm just going to maybe step off of our 18-inch box and get that decel step. Step off the 18-inch box, get that decel step. So lots to think about. I'm excited.
Do you feel like he said in both articles, I think, used the word strong enough, right? And he's both times, which is a lot sooner than most coaches believe. I feel like we're seeing a big shift towards that. Like, hey, we've been kind of spending so much time for diminishing returns on some of this strength. Do you feel like we're strong enough a lot of times? Because I'm talking about with the elite, not only the highest of elite, but kind of like your college, your high Division I college athletes into the pros. Do you feel like they are strong enough?
I feel like some are and
Mhm.
some aren't. And the problem is not even are they strong enough or are they not? It's are we wasting a lot of time pursuing the wrong strength? I think that's the difference is that
Okay.
I think strength coaches waste a huge amount of time pursuing powerlifting strength or Olympic lifting strength. So I always look at strong enough and think they may not be strong enough unilaterally. So I'm starting to broaden my definition and look at this and say, okay, again, we look at it. Can they handle 50% of their body weight in a one leg squat? Can they handle 50% of their body weight in the skater squat? Those types of things. Can they do a chin up with 50% of their body weight? I think the problem with us is that we've accepted a definition of strength that says squat, bench press, deadlift, power clean, and that defines strength. And so you get into, I think it's Goodhart's law, if I'm right. Goodhart's law is sort of when when the test becomes a measurement or the measurement becomes a test, things cease to be effective. And that's what I think is happening for a lot of strength coaches is that it's we've got end and means crossed up in terms of we're looking at we think the end is a max of X in lift X. And I would look at it and think we might be right about hey the double bodyweight squat idea, but I look at it and think we're doing it different anyway in terms of we're pursuing strength in a lot of different lifts so that we're going to really look at someone and think. So I always say, if I get a guy who can bench press 300 pounds, but he can't do chin ups with external load, then I think you've wasted a lot of time doing your upper body training. I think you're pursuing the wrong thing and you're kind of getting involved in like the pet lift kind of thing. If I get somebody, again, if you get a kid, you get a kid that can squat in the 400s, does it really matter if you get to 425 or to 435 or to 440 if that takes you all summer versus if you could spend all that time in unilateral training and getting him to the point where he was handling 50% of his body weight in unilateral exercise? I think that guy would probably move better and be much more injury resistant. So I think that's the part with it's strong enough is I believe we always talk about the lenses, right? I think it's a
Mhm.
reorientation of the lens and saying, okay, I'm no longer going to pursue the power lifter or Olympic lifter's definition of strong enough for my guys. And I may start getting them strong at some things that other people might consider less important.
Yeah, and I think what in he kind of alluded to as well is taking that from, that foundational piece. He wasn't saying on new athletes or low training age, and then taking that time that you used to spend on chasing maybe some meaningless strength, let's just call it that, and being able to now add some of these things into your program to get really work on some of these other things and the tendons and the to your point, the injury prevention piece. So good
Right. And
stuff.
that's where you just used, I think, a better term, the meaningless strength. I think that's where I think you need to look. You can pretty much look at your athlete and say, they're close to as strong as they're going to get based on their body type and their sport. And now, and that's what I always used to look at with football. We would chase 300 to 315, like that 15 pounds on the bench really mattered. When the reality was, if I looked at that kid and said, hey, he's a 300 bencher, it is what it is what it is. Yeah, maybe if we really did a bench press focused program, he'd get to 315. But is that really relevant? Or am I better off knowing that he can one arm dumbbell bench press the hundreds for 10? Is that going to be a better relative indicator of his strength? So I think that's like, it's it's looking at those ceilings and saying, okay, I'm about as good as I can be here. I need to start looking at some other things.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, obviously this is just the beginning because you've started. Hopefully, we'll get some more discussion on the forum, and then you're reading more on this, and I'm sure the discussion come out. Maybe we'll get Hunter on here.
Hey, yeah, you got to get Hunter on, but you slipped the word "on" in there too, which
what I slipped the what?
You said you're reading more on, and and I was like, and you're correct.
All right. I know you are, but what am I? Coach, thanks for doing this.
Always a pleasure, Ant.
Want to improve your client experience? Ask for referrals. Welcome back to Naamly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment, where we delve into the strategies and tactics that elevate your business and helps you foster personalized connections at scale. Today, we're exploring a fascinating and underutilized aspect of member engagement: how asking for referrals doesn't just boost your business, but significantly enhances the member experience by building a community of like-minded individuals. I know that sounds counterintuitive, so let's dive in. When we think about referrals, it's easy to see them simply as a business growth tactic. However, there's a powerful social element at play here that can profoundly impact the gym atmosphere and member satisfaction. Asking for referrals is essentially inviting your members to bring their own community into your gym. People love working out with friends and family, with people they like and enjoy spending time with. It adds a layer of motivation, enjoyment, and accountability to the fitness routine, making the gym more than just a place to sweat. It becomes a social hub, a part of their social life, their third place. Now, this dynamic has a ripple effect. When members work out with people they know and like, they're more likely to stay longer. And if they stay longer, well, guess what happens? They pay longer. And by increasing their membership lifespan, it's not just that you're making more monies, but more importantly, you're making a bigger impact. For it's the difference between helping your clients stick to their fitness goals so they truly see better results as they become more consistent with it, and it also helps you to make a truly supportive community. To summarize, asking for referrals makes them stay longer. When they stay longer, they pay longer. It helps them to make more impact, gets you to get more referrals and build a bigger supportive community, which gives you even more referrals. It's the perfect cycle. So I'm sure you're thinking, how can you make asking for referrals a positive part of your member experience? It starts with how you frame the conversation. Highlight the benefits for both the member and the person they refer. Make it about enhancing their gym experience by bringing in their friends or family, not just about numbers for your gym. Be thoughtful about the incentives you offer. Yes, discounts or freebies are great, but consider also offering experiences or gifts that can be shared, like a private training session for the member and the referral. This not only rewards them, but also reinforces the community aspect of your gym. Implement a system to regularly ask and celebrate referrals. Asking could happen at various points in the member journey, ranging from point of sale to quarterly check-ins and anything in between that you want. And the celebration could be a shout out on your social media, highlighting members who've contributed to growing your fitness family. Acknowledgement like this fosters a sense of belonging and appreciation. And remember, with most things, the key to a successful referral program is simplicity. The process needs to be easy and straightforward. The easier it is for members to refer their friends and family, the more likely they're going to do it. In the end, referrals are about more than just adding numbers to your membership rolls. It's about building a vibrant, connected community where members are motivated to stay, not just because of their fitness goals, but because of the relationships they've built. This approach not only enhances the member experience, but also creates a strong, loyal community around your gym. This is Sumit Seth, co-founder of Naamly. If you enjoyed this segment and are interested in getting more insights and resources on elevating your member experience and setting your business up for success? Then go ahead and click the link on the page where this is hosted.
All right, guys, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. Today, I got on Kevin Carr, no stranger to the podcast. If you listen to this, hopefully you know him by now. He's the co-owner at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. He's been there since 2008. Co-founder at Certified Functional Strength Coach Certification and Movement as Medicine Massage and Movement Therapy Clinic, which is basically inside of MBSC. So I've been doing that for a while. Travels the world kind of teaching the CSFC and all about the MBSC coaching system. He is the dad to one of the possibly cutest babies ever, Kendall. Oh, my God. And with a new addition on the way, as if he didn't have enough to do. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. We're really excited come September. So, two will make us complete. I think it's a boy. So we are excited about that.
Wow, you got the white picket fence, I hope. Yeah. You got 2 dogs. Kev, your lecture, this is something I've been I listened to Peter Tita's book, then I had to buy it. Now it's like my Bible. I have, I'm underlying everything. I'm listening as well again. I just got it for my brother-in-law retired. He's 60. He's going to be 60 and he retired. And I think it's a perfect time for him to read this book. My client just started listening to one of them and she's just like, I had my mouth open just listening the whole time. And it was like unbelievable. And so a lot of this stuff, right? You're talking about in this 5 fitness facts that could save your life. But I love what you say. The personal trainer is the frontline healthcare practitioner. And I've talked about this before in my lecture it's that ripple effect, man. You get that mom in shape or that dad in shape and kind of ripples down to the whole family. And I think some of the stuff we're learning now, it's really a paradigm shift about really reducing cancer risk and Alzheimer's. Can that be maybe prevented? People didn't think that we could do that. So where did this come from for you? Did this, come from the demographic that, you guys are seeing in MBSC? Is this something that you kind of started to be like, because I know you love research as well. So this is the cool thing about all this stuff is like, there's so much research on this that's emerging that like is really hopeful.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So in 2014, 10 years ago, I did a presentation at the seminar called Movement as Medicine, Prescribing the World's Strongest Medicine, where I really started to get excited and dive into the research between, improving both health span and lifespan. And I like to think I'm a lot smarter now, 10 years later, and there's a lot more research. And like you said, there's so many more people who have large profiles, people like Peter Attia or Rhonda Patrick, who speak a lot about exercise for improving health span. And we've seen that space kind of explode in that time since then. And I think there's still really a need for people who are actual coaches who are doing this every day to be able to distill the information with practical applications for both our clients as well as other coaches. I think even sometimes, you see there's so much research out there and you have really smart people out there sharing it, but sometimes I think it's disconnected from what are we actually doing? And so what I really was passionate about in putting this together was, what am I actually doing with my clients based on kind of these big rocks, these big things I want to think about, and kind of really going into assessment and going into programming and how to really program for the everyday person, the person who comes to the gym 2 or 3 days a week, because these are the people who really need our help. Not necessarily like the fitness person is probably pretty healthy, but the people who are coming as consumers, how do we actually apply this to them and get them up in moving and really making an impact on their life?
Kev, have you found that people are pretty excited? The end user, the consumer, the client. I found when I am meeting people for the first time and talk to them about some of this stuff, it seems to be because we're in a bubble. We think everybody is following, all of our people, the Mike Boyles and the Stuart McGills and whatever. And you go to a big gym. I work at Lifetime. I mean, you go to a big gym, you're like, is this really still happening right now? This is what's going on. And some people are just stuck, older folks are kind of stuck in this. I don't know what to do. I don't know. So I'm going to go on the machines, right? Type of thing. And when people hear this stuff from me about hey, you need to be more on your feet. Let's go on this cable machine. Let's do this. This is what we're going to do about Healthspan. Like we want to feel better. We want to transfer this stuff from here out to outside to your everyday life. Have you seen more of a buy-in from the consumer as well?
Yeah, and I think when you're able to connect it to the things that they're passionate about or they care about, and get them to understand why, like you said, why squatting is important so they can pick their kids up, or why plyometrics are important so they can keep playing tennis into their 60s, 70s, 80s. Why doing deadlifts or kettlebell swings or something might be important so they can go out and run and be powerful. Like I think once you can get them to connect it to the things that they're passionate about, it lights up a light bulb on them. Because in reality, the average end user doesn't care about deadlifts. They don't care about bench press. They care about everything they do outside of there. And I think in fitness, sometimes part of our issue is we're so excited about lifting. But the guy I just trained before this for an hour couldn't care less about lifting weights. He plays tennis 5 days a week. And so everything I do, I talk about, hey, the mobility is important so you can recover and move the way you need to. He's 65. The power stuff is important. So when you're cutting and planting, you're not getting strained, so you can be powerful. And so getting them to understand the connection is what gets them passionate about. So it's like that idea of, start with why, or going back to the things that they're excited about. And then your ability as a coach to kind of explain that to them is usually the motivator and kind of what gets them jazzed up about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That you get the ability as a coach to explain what we're doing and why it's important, I think is kind of the key. I talk to people about what I call the power playground. And the reason why I call it that is because I look around, no one's really doing any power training. I don't consider myself doing plyometrics to people. I just call it jump training, right? Because it's not plyometrics if you saw what they were doing, but at least they're getting something in. And we kind of go in 3 planes of motion. And I we have the medicine ball out. I bring a medicine ball to Lifetime, a 4-pound medicine ball, one of the Perform Better ones, because it doesn't really bounce. So we don't have one there at the gym. And I carry that around because every client does medicine ball training. I call it the power playground because they say, look, I want to bring you back to the playground. It's basically the MBSC jump, throw, sprint idea. We don't really sprint. I get them on the bike or even on the skill mill to kind of, at least get them running in. But I tell them, look, my favorite quote, you don't stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing. And that's part of me bringing the playground to them. So can you just talk, because in your description, you said, as a means to improve lifespan and healthspan, could you, for people that might not know the difference between those two things, can you just explain that?
Yeah. So lifespan is the thing that we always hear, right? Like the average lifespan of the American is like 78 years old, I think, for a man, slightly longer for women because they tend to be smarter than us. And so like, that's how long they live. But in reality, healthspan is what we are really trying to have an impact on. And I think if we do a good job with healthspan, then we affect lifespan. And that healthspan means like, how long do people have their health? Do they have their independence? Can they complete tasks of daily living and complete recreational tasks? And in reality, what you tend to see is, I think there's an old quote that said, most people die at 30, but their body just sticks around for another 40 years. And like you said, you don't stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing. And so what you want to think is like, if you had like a curve, you want to keep that curve up as high as you can for as long as you can, and then die hard and fast from a functionality standpoint. What most people fear as they get older is not necessarily dying, but that slow decline where you can't do the things that you used to. You rely on other people to help you with tasks of daily living and independence. And so healthspan is really, how can we keep people active and moving for as long as possible? And I mean, I look at some of my clients. We have some older clients here in their 70s and 80s, and they're people who have been lifelong exercisers. And some of them have been with us for, 10 plus years. Like I had a doctor that was in this morning. He's in his 80s. He just retired. He was working as a pediatrician into his early 80s, and he's still running, still staying active. That's someone who one, has already a longer than average lifespan, but also has kept his health span and his activity late into life. And so you see people who are active. They're the people who are like, wow, they're still so sharp when they're older, or they're still so active when they're older. But it's about the work they did, since they were in their 20s or 30s. That extended them to help them get there.
Yeah, and I think people don't understand the impact as well. I remember reading John Medina's book called Brain Rules, And literally the first rule from a brain scientist, like he says, I am a brain scientist. I am your worst nightmare from the perspective of, if you tell me anything about the brain, I want to see the human randomized trials, that Layne Norton would say, the double blinded, whatever. You better have that. And all he talked about, the first chapter in Brain Rules, is all about exercise. And he talks about Jack LaLanne. He's like, I don't want you to look at Jack LaLanne's body. I want you to listen to him talk at 98 years old. The guy was sharp as a tack. And I think people don't understand. And you mentioned it. How can we maintain our cognitive health as we grow older? Is there anything you're doing specific, or just saying, hey, you're coming to the gym, but is it from a cognitive piece? Is there anything you're trying to do to say, hey, we can improve this in the gym as well? Mm-hmm. What are you guys doing?
Well, it's interesting. So one of the things I talk about in the presentation is that we know physical capacity as measured by both VO2 max as well as muscle function is directly correlated with things like Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, dementia. And so I know a lot of people, like you said, don't necessarily think that. People still have this duality where they think the body and brain are this separate thing. And so getting people to understand, I think not everyone's always motivated by physicality, but I think just about everybody's motivated by, if I start losing my memory and my ability to think clearly as I get older, that's really scary. And so a lot of the same parameters, things like a sit to stand test, things like a basic bike test, like we do the 2-mile test, are good markers. Resting heart rate or heart rate recovery in the minute following a test are good markers of cardiovascular health. And something like a sit to stand is a pretty good standard for both fall risk prevention, as well as we use it for lower body strength and power for adults as they get older. And so I think you can use a lot of the same markers as someone who's a strength coach. Those are the type of tools you have at your disposal to be able to get a good look at both of those things.
Yeah. I've even done some things where I'm trying to play around with the play. So, for example, with the ball, and make them do things that maybe, like from the talent code perspective, right? When he talked about learning a new skill, I'm trying to throw some new stuff in there from that perspective, like, hey, let's get you to, I don't know, let's say step back now and throw the ball to me, or something new, do a side lunge and throw the ball, whatever. Just things that they haven't done, or I'll try to challenge them from that perspective, from a learning perspective, to make sure those synapses are starting to fire and grow. So just something for me that I'm playing with.
Yeah. So there's, I love that. And something I kind of talk about in the presentation. There's a great book I read years ago called Smart Moves by Carla Hannaford. And she is like a neurodevelopmental therapist. She works with people with kids who might have learning disabilities or adults. And I remember the quote stuck with me. She said, coordinated cross-body activities help strengthen the corpus callosum. So the little thing that connects two sides of your head. And helps strengthen both motor hemispheres in the brain. And so the warm-up, I think, is such an underrated period of the program. You always hear people say the warm-up's not important, just get in there and start lifting. But for adults, this is a really great opportunity, not just to increase their body tissue temperature or wake up their nervous system, but for motor development and start to challenge them in patterns that you might not be willing to train in the weight room, right? Things where you're going to rotate, things where you're going to go forward, backwards, sideways. And so we always tell our coaches, that's actually for our adults, from a neurodevelopmental standpoint and a neurological training standpoint, such a great opportunity to, yes, warm them up, but get them to move in different patterns and challenge their brain a little bit. Like karaoke, skipping, shuffling, like you said, variations of med ball throws, become ladder drills, obviously, become really good tools for that to keep their brain sharp as they get older.
Wow, so true. I forgot the corporate. I remember skipping. Skipping is an activity that they said the corpus callosum, that will kind of work both hemispheres. Believe it or not. And if you watch Tim Anderson from Original Strength, and they'll do some things where they're taking their right hand and lifting their left knee up and touching it, right, going across that hemisphere as I actually went through we were at a meeting one time, and it was one of his coaches were there, and we went through this 5-minute, let's take a break and do this. We're going to go through the Original Strength stuff. And it was kind of interesting and kind of got you thinking and laughing, and which obviously always helps. But you mentioned VO2. I've really kind of gone crazy. Again, anything the Peter Attia stuff right now. I just did I'm working at right now on getting certified for the active metabolic assessment at Lifetime. I've taken it a couple times. I got a 50 the other day, which for me is huge. At 57, Peter Attia wants to see 2 age groups below. So I've really been working on that. So what are you guys, besides waiting for the hostile takeover or the hostile throwing out of Boyle when you get your some of your new technology in there? What are you guys do the 2-mile test? You mentioned it, and you have a great on MBSC.TV. Go over that in one of your segments, and you have a nice little chart that, like, hey, once you get these numbers, you want to do these intervals. Here's the number we want you at. So, talk to us about that test you're doing, please.
Yeah. I think we found the best way to try to get a look in our setting at someone's like aerobic health or aerobic power is doing like a 2-mile bike test, right? And real simply, we'll put them on the bike, and we want them to essentially complete, 2 miles as fast as they can. And it's important to tell them, listen, I don't want you to come out the gates at like 80 RPMs and then crash. I want you the hardest sustained effort that you can maintain over that 2 miles. And by definition, we're going to look at their RPMs or their watts, their power number. We use RPMs because it's an easier number. By definition, that's their max aerobic speed, the max effort they can maintain aerobically over that period of time. So that gives us a metric. And then what we do is we prescribe intervals, kind of like Tabata style intervals, 10 on, 20 off, or 20 on, 10 off, based on, either 110% or 120% of that max aerobic speed number. And that kind of came from a lot of like the Dan Baker research, where they looked at, how to improve aerobic power and what the kind of takeaway was for intensity. And what they said is it didn't really matter much if they did 10 seconds on, 20 seconds on, 30 seconds on. The key thing was that they had to be above their max aerobic speed to see improvements. And then by adding volume, it would increase their impact. And so if you think about like our average consumer who comes 2 days a week, and we still want to fit in mobility, we want to sit in warmth, we want to fit in strength training, it's hard for us to do more extensive work, at least in the gym. Whereas we know we can get an improvement on that, anaerobic threshold or their aerobic power by doing like, 2 rounds of 8, 10 on, 20 off at 120% of their max aerobic speed. That takes like 8 minutes. And so for the person who might be time sensitive, which is the average consumer, it allows us a short, time efficient way to get higher intensity work above that max aerobic speed. And then hopefully, we can build habits where they can start to do maybe that lower intensity work when they're not with us, whether it's they go to the gym or they ride their bike or walk, and then maybe start to add more exercise days as they start to see improvements and get some buy-in. So for us, it's a really good way to get high intensity interval work in at appropriate interval intensity based on that test.
Yeah, what I really like about it too is if anybody listening, you didn't hear the word heart rate there, and not everyone's going to have a heart rate monitor on all the time, right? I know you guys have some there, but it's based on that speed. So basically, are you telling them, okay, now Mike said in his article, I think it was 10 great airdyne workouts, he talks about the MAS test, right? Mm-hmm. But what did he say? To go under 5 minutes, you had to be at what? Is it 58 RPMs or 60 RPMs?
Yeah, it'd probably have to be right around, I would say. So under 5 minutes, you'd probably have to be around 60 RPMs. Yeah.
Okay. Will you see some guy and be like, hey, I want you to be at 55 right now? I'm sort of like from administering this test, how would we kind of ease somebody into it?
Yeah. So the key is like, you have to do the conditioning yourself as the coach, or you have no reference point to be able to tell somebody, hey, this is where you got to go. Cause they always ask like, how hard do I ride? And so like, if you're looking at like I'm a 6 foot, 220 pound guy, I had someone who's relatively fit around my size. So I'd be like, hey, go around 55 RPM, see how that feels after the first minute. And then let's see if we can maintain that or go up. And because they're naturally going to push really hard for that last 45 seconds anyways. And if it's someone who's smaller, I'd say, hey, maybe go 50 RPMs, right? Let's see how you feel. Because in reality, I would say we're just trying to set the bottom, right? We just don't want them underneath that max aerobic speed number. So what I do is like, hey, you get their number, they do their first day of intervals. If it feels easy, I'll be like, all right, let's go up a few RPMs next week, because you're not going to be penalized for working harder on the intervals as long as you can maintain it for all of the reps that you do. And so just set the bottom, and then we're going to usually retest in a few months anyways. And then they'll have a better idea of what they can ride at that point. So just think that long-term approach. And again, if you're a coach, you have to do the conditioning, or it's really hard to prescribe efficiently for them.
Yeah. And so I did this right before knee surgery, like probably about 6 weeks before knee surgery a couple of years ago, to kind of be like, all right, I want to just get as in best shape as I can from the perspective, and the doc's like, don't worry about the bike. You could do as much bike as you want. So you get that number. It's the average RPMs, right? And then that's where you're getting, just so everybody knows, that's where you're getting the 110 and the 120 from, right? So now you know, instead of, I have to get up to this heart rate, which you can't do in 10 seconds anyway. It's like, no, you're not going to get up. Over time you are. It's going to be brutal. But so you're using the RPM number, right, as, okay, your average was 50, 110% of that would be 60, right? So, right. So that's how you're doing it, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a nice it's almost like a multiplication table. Like, we have all the RPMs, we have the intervals, prescribed interval distance lengths on the side, and then they just go down and they find their number. And so that way it's just easy plug and play for them to find a starting point.
Yeah, and by the way, that was wrong. 50 times, it's 55.
I was going to say that was 55.
Yeah. So, sorry about that, everybody. So that is a great way to kind of start and get going. And again, somebody might say, hey, I heard on this, 3 minutes, kind of being in that near anaerobic threshold, whatever. That's if you know your heart rate. Actually, Atia does it mostly on based on wattage, but he'll do like 3 minutes, 4 minute intervals, and 3-4 minutes off. But to your point, we can't always prescribe that in the gym.
Yeah. And I've been doing the 4x4 myself. It's great. It's brutal and it's effective. It's been helpful for me. But what I've been doing with my clients after we've done the 10-20s for a while is just starting with shorter work periods and then building towards that. Like, my girls that I just left are out there doing the 4x4 right now, but we started doing 3x2. So 3 2-minute efforts, right? And then we started to go 3-2-2, right? And we just built a pyramid up in volume, because most people, like, if you take an average person and say, hey, go do 4x4 minutes, they're going to get tortured. So I just build the pyramid up that way, and then by the time they get there, their actually capacity is pretty good. And so I think that's the stuff I want to talk about in this talk, is like, hey, we hear hey, that 4x4 minute matrix protocol is great. It is. But how do you actually get somebody to that? Because in reality, when, Jane, 60-year-old Jane, walks in, has never exercised before, what are you actually going to start with her? And so that's in the presentation, the stuff I want to try to give to coaches.
Yeah. Are you doing, let's finish up with this, any VO2, again, VO2 max right now, if you really want the true measure, you have to do some kind of a, with the mask on and get the whole thing. What are you guys doing? Some kind of a VO2 max like estimate type thing at all? Just because it's something that you're talking about, people want to know what that number is.
Yeah, no. So it's tough to get a real estimate if you're not doing the direct calorimetry with like the mask on. I'm actually going to schedule to get one done for myself in a few weeks once my kind of travel calms down, because I have been riding, and there are places I know you can go to and get it done. Probably costs like $100-something, and they either put you on a treadmill or a bike. I always say pick, whatever mode you're going to train with most, and you have been training with, and you can go get it done. But we don't do any in-house. I know there are more and more kind of cost-efficient ways for coaches now to be able to do that, and I'm sure that technology will continue to progress as we go. But I would just, if someone's interested, you could probably find someone in your city to refer them out to get that done.
Yeah, and I think there is. Joel Jameson was talking about something on the rower, right? But I agree with you. It's hard. Ideally, you want the test that's going to be that you're going to get on. You're going to do afterwards. If you're someone who's using the bike a lot, it's the best way to go. So, cool, Kev. Thank you so much for doing this, guys. April 13th and 14th, MBSC Spring Seminar. We've already had Luca Hocevar and Jake Tur on. Cassie Day will be there. Kevin speaking. Dan McGinley, Vinny Toledo, and Jess Tolman are also all speaking, and Coach Boyle too, but nobody wants to hear him.
Throw him in there.
Yeah, he's whatever. But Kev, thanks for doing this, bud. I appreciate you, and good luck with this.
Yeah, and one thing I will note for the seminar, it's available in person as well as like a really high quality live stream if you can't come in person. And so the live stream option, we have a professional camera crew come in, multiple cameras, mics and everything. So it's a really good quality experience if you can't be here in person, and you get all the recordings as well. So yeah, thank you for having me on, and it's always good to talk to you, Ian.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, that's going to do for episode 378 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Guys, the show notes are located at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, you can try strengthcoach.com or MBSC.tv out for 7 days for free. Go to strengthcoach.com or MBSC.tv. Special thanks to Chris Porter and the folks over at Perform Better. The functional training summits are coming. Lineups are there. You can check it all out at Perform Better. Orlando, May 30th to June 1st, Chicago, June 27th to the 29th, LA, August 1st to the 3rd, and Providence, August 22nd to the 24th. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Kevin Carr for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, force, and longevity. Thanks to Sumit Seth and Naamly, helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Guys, check out the show notes for Naamly's free fitness business boost bundle. You get a checklist, 51 ways to acquire clients without running ads, a cheat sheet, 12 places to look to hire star trainers, and a guide, 9 secrets to increase your retention. All right, the link is at strengthcoachpodcast.com in the show notes for that. That's going to do it for this episode. My name is Anthony Rana. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.